Spurred on by their own struggle against apartheid, South Africans are combating oppression in Palestine.
Our struggle was not just about our own liberation. We were a beacon for the rest of the world.
Experts in Cape Town have ruled Israel is practicing apartheid policies, sparking fresh protest.
The Russell Tribunal has given some parts of South African society renewed motivation to strive for change for the Palestinian people.
No justice, no peace! No justice.
This edition of INfocus uncovers a growing wave of activism in South Africa. A convoy to Gaza, demonstrations and political lobbies. These are South Africans demanding an end to discrimination in Palestine.
It's our responsibility to make sure that apartheid in South Africa doesn't happen again.
But they have a unique reason driving them to campaign, their own apartheid legacy.
And one day we'll see that wall fall, we'll see that regime fall too.
Marred by a history of a racist regime that segregated people by the colour of their skin. They are no strangers to human rights abuses. But they have seen justice overthrow oppression, with a leading apartheid opponent leaving jail to become the country's president. I travelled to Cape Town to find out what South Africans are doing for Palestine and what drives them. On the day of international solidarity with the Palestinian people, Nelson Mandela commended the UN and the international community for helping to overthrow the apartheid regime. And he said, but the freedom for South Africans will be incomplete until there is freedom for Palestine. I wanted to meet activists to find out why they say they are unique in their connection to Palestine. My first stop was to meet longtime human rights campaigner Edwin Harrison.
We have taken inspiration from those words and made it our own. And I have found that in talking to people in Palestine, they don't think of us simply as being in solidarity with them. They think of South Africans actually as their brothers and their sisters, and we the same. We think of them in a much deeper way than simply being in solidarity with them. We say today, if they touch you, they touch us. Very strong link that we have with them. And so those of us who were activists against apartheid are today activists against Israeli apartheid. And in the same way that we were very clear that apartheid had to go, there's no compromise with apartheid, it had to go. You could not reform it even. You had to say it had to go completely. In the same way, we will say the occupation has to go completely. It must happen, and we will not rest until that happens.
Mersha Andrews is a tireless campaigner who has defended human rights for at least 35 years.
The area that's, I think, the biggest solidarity movement in this country is the Palestine Solidarity movement. And at the moment, or in the last 2 years, lots of the churches have become involved. In different parts of the country, solidarity groups have emerged.
What has the group that you're part of been doing to show solidarity?
We'd organise protest marches, we'd organise public events where we can raise awareness. We would organise also briefings to government, protests in front of the American Embassy, education around whatever, the boycott as a weapon of struggle, the BDS, and do lots of research on who is trading, what's South Africa's role, what the South African government is doing. We have a core are members who've been consistent over the last 15 years.
Of the Palestinian Center for Human
A recent
Rights.
ruling by experts from across the globe who met in Cape Town found that the Israeli policies towards the Palestinian people are in fact classified as apartheid under international law.
My name is Emily Schaefer. I'm a lawyer practicing in Israel, and I've been asked to testify to you today about the separate legal systems for Palestinians and Israeli settlers in the West Bank.
The investigation was part of the Russell Tribunal launched 3 years ago by a group of citizens to assess the legality of the actions of the Israeli government.
The Russell Tribunal, which was held at this museum, has given some parts of South African society renewed motivation to strive for change for the Palestinian people.
Lawyers, politicians and human rights workers heard evidence from witnesses about the political, legal and social systems in Israel and Palestine. The jury found unanimously that Israel is practicing apartheid.
They all convinced us, even those of us who were doubtful about it in the beginning, that it was right to use the term apartheid, because if you really look into international law, as we have been doing during these 2 days, we reached the firm conviction that the application of apartheid to the situation in Palestine is the proper answer in terms of present international law, including the status of the International Criminal Court.
The Congress of South African Trade Unions will be incorporating this development into its work.
Now that these findings have been reached, what are you calling for from the South African government?
Well, we want our government to introduce sanctions. We want the world to introduce sanctions. The same pressure that was brought to bear to the apartheid government through sanctions should be brought to bear to the Israeli government in order to make sure that there's going to be some lasting peace in the area and that people are going to be treated equally. Palestinians have the right to live where they have historically been.
On various levels, people's consciousness have begun to change.
The tribunal aims to inform the public so they can choose to play a more socially aware role in the societies in which they live.
We now need to ask civil society to use it, to popularize it, to take it both to the people and also to the leaderships in parliaments across the world, and ultimately to the UN. But we shouldn't put our faith in these government processes. I think they are important, and it eventually is important that decisions be made on that level. But the most important thing is to take it to the people, into the civil society movements, and start organizing for justice for the Palestinian people.
White are not addressed.
South African campaigners have seen results in their own country. One key success for activists has been in the fight for families forced from their homes to make way for white occupiers to reclaim their land. It took 3 decades, and I wanted to meet some of the first to move back.
We're going to meet one of the first families that was forced to leave District 6. Hello.
Hello.
Nice to meet you.
Same. Kwakubuhlungu ukumka kwethu apha ngoba kaloku sasisiwa kwindawo esingayaziyo.
She says that all the black Africans were forced to leave District 6. She said that it was very painful having to leave her home, and it meant that her future was very uncertain.
Ndingathi mnye umuntu wasilwelayo ngoba yena wancama ubomi bakhe wawuhlala eRobben Island kwabamnandi savuya xa kuthiwa sizawubuyela back eDistrict 6 ngoba yona ndawo esasihleli kuyo sikhulele kuyo siphangela kamandi sihleli nabantu.
When you lived here before, there was a multiracial community. Now, do you still feel that spirit of togetherness with your neighbours?
Ewe kakhulu ngoba siye sahlangana nabantu esasihlukene nabo kudala saphinda kwayilaa nto imnandi sidibene sihleli apha kungekho calucalulo.
In Palestine, more than 5 million people were pushed off their land during 2 major military attacks. Thousands more are forced out daily in the face of bulldozers. Slow resolution of the apartheid crimes that were committed has breathed hope into South Africans that justice will prevail.
We must stick together. We must be united like a close fist.
It was a swing in international public opinion that sparked change for South Africans, with governments no longer able to ignore the voice of the people. Apartheid opponent Alan Boesak told me that 1976 was a turning point that led to the eventual dismantlement of the apartheid in 1994.
After 1976, the world was robbed of its innocence in terms of how far the apartheid regime was willing to go to maintain white privilege and power by beginning to openly kill innocent, unarmed children. That was a turning point for us and for the world. And that was the beginning of an international solidarity that in the end had helped to end apartheid, along with our struggles inside. As far as I can see, and that is one of the differences that makes it worse for Palestinians. That level of international solidarity has not been reached. I ask myself, if 1976 and the shooting of children here was a point of departure for the world in terms of thinking something must be done here, when is that point going to be reached as far as the Palestinians are concerned? How many children will have to die? When is the world going to be robbed of its innocence, of the intentions of the Israeli government? I mean, the settlements go on and on and on, and everybody knows what that means.
In the poorer areas of Cape Town, people are still suffering the consequences of the South African apartheid's policies of segregation.
People in Gugulethu are saying that they fought hard for the abolition of the apartheid, but they still need more. They still need to get out of the cycle of deprivation and poverty which they found themselves in because of the inequality that still exists in society.
Despite grappling daily with their own problems of poverty and crime, innocence about international issues is lifting.
Palestine, I can say every time people are fighting for their rights. But now here there's no such wars and fighting.
The situation which they are in and which we were in during apartheid is vastly different. I was locked up for 3 days in 1976. I was 14 years old, and I lost lots of my friends. I was beaten up every day by the police during the time I was locked up. But what the people of Palestine is going through is far worse. I mean, getting shot. I've seen people shot by the police. I think that is criminal, and they're getting away with it.
And what's the solution in Israel and Palestine? What needs to be done?
We are a prime example because we solved our problems. We were fighting with the Boers, and we were giving them, they're walking freely here, up and down here. The same thing can happen there. The Palestinian people and of the Jewish people, they're all peace-loving people because they got the same greeting, salam, so they can live. But the Americans must get out. The British must get out. whoever that quantum, whatever, they must all get out and let them solve it peacefully, and it can be done.
Do you think that they can learn something from what happened in South Africa?
Obviously, they can. They can solve, any problem can be solved by people.
But is their plight being supported by their government? I'm outside Parliament where I'm meeting Max Osinski, a spokesman for the African National Congress. This party is in power here, and the same party responsible for toppling the apartheid regime in South Africa. But are they doing anything to put forward the case for Palestinians on an international scale?
Really what the ANC and its government has been trying to do is bring Israelis and Palestinians closer together to get them to understand each other's situation and each other's fears so that you can begin a real negotiations process, because the balance of power is so much in the hands of the Israeli government that it's almost as if they feel they don't need to negotiate in this situation, and we need to help that shift in the balance of power as well. Our government has been a strong political friend of the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian liberation movements in international forums like the United Nations and other international forums, trying to help facilitate the process, that there's not that the political process between Israel and the Palestinians is not as one-sided as it is at the moment, because the balance of power is so much in the hands of the Israeli government that it's almost as if they feel they don't need to negotiate in this situation, and we need to help that shift in the balance of power as well.
But activists working at the grassroots to support Palestine don't agree.
Its policy would be in support of Palestine on paper, but there's nothing in its action, even its international official government pronouncements, that would indicate that. I'm not suggesting they're opposed to the Palestinians or they're siding with the Israelis, but they've done very little, in fact next to nothing, to seriously promote the cause of the Palestinians. We are hoping to engage the government, starting with our International Relations Portfolio Committee in Parliament. We're going to plan for meetings with them in the new year and to push them on having a more progressive policy on Palestine and being more proactive at an international level, especially since it's got a place on the Security Council. It should have some influence. And given the history of South Africa and its symbolism internationally, we have a role to play that's disproportionate to our power in the world. And that's the other important thing. We, in a sense, want to pay back internationally for what the international community of ordinary people did in support of our struggle.
Trade ties between Israel and South Africa are strong, as is the Zionist lobby in the country. The Russell Tribunal came under attack by supporters of Israel. We're outside Cape Town's High Court, but unlike this bastion of law, the Russell Tribunal was held at the District 6 Museum, which holds no legal weight. So what is its significance, and what clout do its findings really have? I asked a well-established British QC, who was one of the jurors on the tribunal, what he thought.
In fact, I think our legitimacy is, in fact, at the end of the day, justified by the fact that no other body, whilst it has an obligation, other than the World Court in 2004, has had the courage, no other tribunal, no other court, no other prosecuting body, no other judicial body has had the courage to act when plainly they should have. And it seems to me we're legitimized by the absence of action by people who have a responsibility. That's our legitimacy. And that we are looking at real testimony. It's not a political debate. This is people coming and saying what has happened to them. And it seems to me that's one of the most important personal testaments, exactly the same as the Truth and Reconciliation Commission headed by Archbishop Tutu, who opened the Russell Tribunal in South Africa, did for South Africa. His legitimacy was to say, we're allowing people to come and tell us what has happened. We asked Israel to send a representative, to make representations. They pretended to ignore. They're listening.
The Israeli government continues to build a separation barrier between Palestine and Israel, despite pressure from the International Court of Justice to stop construction. Demolition of the homes of Palestinians to make way for Israeli housing developments carries on, despite being judged as illegal under international law. The lack of enforcement by key international bodies is reminiscent of the initial blind eye turned to racism in South Africa by global leaders. People power became too loud to turn away from and led governments to stab the economic heart of the country. Similar strategies are being implemented by South African trade unions.
Been instances in Cape Town where workers have refused to work with goods that have come from ships from Israel or goods that were known to be imported from Israel.
Some of the big supermarket chains in this country have strong links with Israel, and those are also areas that we're trying to put pressure on. We've concentrated quite a lot on the academic boycott and to insist at the universities that there's much greater vigilance on the relationship between academics from Israel coming to South Africa and who are they, what are they saying, etc. So that's been one area.
I think that it's great that students here came to see and speak with us and listen to us, because it is important to see the other side. It is important to see the side that you don't know.
Free, free Palestine!
The students interrupted a presentation by the South African Union of Jewish Students at the University of Johannesburg, and their message was loud and clear.
No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace! No justice, no peace!
They pledged to campaign for justice, in the same way those who came before them fought to ensure their freedom today.
Remember why we're here though. They're like Palestinian rights at risk, and we have to protect those things. It's not okay to have separate roads. It's not okay to have a giant wall. It's not okay to not give access to sewerage and hospitals and building equipment. It's crucial that we let them know that what they're doing is not okay. It's our responsibility to make sure that apartheid in South Africa doesn't happen again. Yes. It can't happen in Israel. It can't happen again. So let's keep on fighting, keep on building, and one day we'll see that wall fall, we'll see that regime fall too. Keep fighting.
Turned into a prison camp. Apartheid won't divide the West Bank. We are the people.